Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from the Climate Solutions Accelerator, hosting a 2-day interactive summit focused on co-creating a regenerative future for the Genesee Finger Lakes region, April 4th and 5th at the Convention Center. Registration at climategfl.org.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Patrick Hoskin, in for Evan Dawson. Our connection this hour was made by Nathan Lyons in 1969. The Rochester-based photographer was working at the George Eastman Museum and assembled a visual studies master's program, but resigned before it was fully implemented. He started his own school in collaboration with its earliest students. It was called the Photographic Studies Workshop at 4 Elton Street in the neighborhood of the Arts. Artists would come, work would be shown in exhibitions, and a press would be founded by Joan Lyons to highlight the work of the visual artists. The organization itself would come to be called Visual Studies Workshop and settle into a new building at 31 Prince Street, a stone's throw from the Memorial Art Gallery. And in its 50-plus year history, VSW has staged hundreds of exhibitions, published hundreds of books, and been a hub for continuing education. For many years, the nonprofit media arts organization offered a graduate degree first through SUNY Buffalo and then SUNY Brockport, though that's been discontinued. But VFW's archives house dozens upon dozens of film reels, photographs, transparent glass positives called lantern slides. Many of the analog visuals have been digitized and are available to view online right now. Those efforts are ongoing, and artists from across the world still come to VSW as part of its Project Space residency to make use of these vast archives in their work. And I do feel like I'm only kind of scratching the surface in terms of 50 years of history as well as ongoing things, but I tried to get as much of it as I could in there. We'll get into it momentarily. All of this sets the scene for the new chapter that VSW begins this month when the organization reopens at 36 King Street in the Susan B. Anthony neighborhood. The first exhibition in the new space is called Sequence Break. It's billed as a dynamic multimedia exhibition featuring works by artists who challenge mainstream commercial video game culture through various means. And it's all in keeping with the ways that VSW has evolved beyond photography and video art to reflect creative work in the visual realm, like video games, for example. So a lot of information. I hope everyone's up to speed. To discuss all this, I'm very lucky to be joined by folks from the team at VSW to talk past, present, and future. We have Nilsen Carroll is here, Assistant Curator and Preservation Specialist at VSW, and also the Curator for Sequence Break. So thanks for being here.
Yes, thank you.
Ernez Davis is the Assistant Curator and Residency Coordinator at VSW. Thanks so much for being here, Ernez.
Thank you.
Jessica Johnson is the Executive Director at VSW. Thank you for joining us, Jessica.
Thanks, Patrick.
And Tara Miranda Nelson is the Curator at VSW and Managing Editor of VSW Press. Thank you, Tara, for being here.
Thank you, Patrick.
So, to my knowledge, no one in this room has been at VSW since 1969, right? So,
No.
So no one can speak from experience for that far back. But there's something to be said about kind of the continued evolution and growth. Obviously, the new move is a part of that. Jessica, you've been at the helm for a couple years now. 2022, I believe you took over?
Yes, that's right.
Maybe we can start by laying out just a little bit of what is VSW's mission now?
Okay. Visual Studies Workshop, the mission is to nurture experimental and expansive approaches to photography, film, and media arts, and to build community among artists and the public through exhibitions, publications, and residencies. And our vision is for a society that values the human need to create and share ideas.
Cool. Can you pull it just a tad bit closer to you feel free to grab the mic too. Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Love it. Okay. So, I appreciate that. That kind of sets the scene for a lot of the work being done in conversation with a lot of the work that has been done in the past. We spoke when the move was announced and we reported it for City. There were many reasons for the move. As I understand, it was at least partly motivated by, part of that mission being the public accessibility aspect. So can you talk a little bit more about that too?
Well, with our, we're in a big transition because of sort of a shift with the closing of the MFA program. We no longer needed a building that is 25,000 square feet. It's a, massive space. It was built in 1914, so there's a lot of, upkeep. And just without all of the students, it really wasn't appropriate. And So we had been planning to find a new space, and one of our goals was to be in a facility that is more accessible, more sort of outward facing. That's one of the things that we're really trying to do is invite the community in more, and the new space does that.
And I that's really helpful to know because sort of to bring everyone else in the conversation, like that aspect bears itself out on the work that you all do, and the work that you do is in part to encourage that sort of accessibility in public. So maybe I don't know, Tara, maybe do you want to start and just maybe talk about your work as it relates to that mission and kind of that accessibility aspect?
Oh yeah, sure. I'm the curator, and I also program the Salon series with my colleagues. I also oversee, as managing editor, the VSW Press. A major part of my work over the past 11 years, I began as a visiting artist in the residency program. And I was overwhelmed with the amazing archives and how lucky I felt to be able to explore them. I'm a filmmaker. I work in media and installation. And at that time, 11 years ago, this collection was harder to access. It wasn't really available online. So many of my predecessors and students at VSW had been programming from the film archive for a very long time as a way of providing public access. And I continued that. And working especially with Jessica as collection, she was then the head of collections. We really, and Tate Shaw also, who was the director at the time, we really worked on opening up the archive and creating accessible opportunities for the community. Most of the collection came from the public realm here in Rochester. So the 16 millimeter film collection mostly came from the Rochester Public Library system, as well as universities, University of Rochester and SUNY Brockport. And so they're educational films, and they're films that are pink and scratched and well-loved and a lot of people maybe grew up in the library going to see these films. And we decided that we should really open that up again, and we created the Community Curator Program in 2018, which is a program that basically does just that. We facilitate access to the community. People can program their own screenings. We focus on community groups, working with them and helping them sort of fulfill their mission and reach their constituents through programming from the film and video collection.
So you mentioned first coming as a visiting artist, you said?
I did, yeah. I was a visiting artist. Yeah.
What was it like to be able to kind of experience that archive? You mentioned being sort of struck by it. Do you remember a little bit about that experience?
Yes. It was, I thought I had just died and gone to heaven. It's like it was a dream come true. I worked in Super 8 and 16 millimeter, and that was my background. The previous building is a castle, and it was full of treasure. It was amazing, and I was just so privileged to be able to watch these films and care for them. They were well cared for, but films age and they need constant care. And what was really exciting for me is not just, my practice is also in sharing opportunities and through sort of programming. So to bring other artists through to show their films and to use the collection as well, which is something that we also do currently in our Salon program in the In Dialogue series, which is invite practicing artists to use the collections and show their work alongside films, videos, lantern slides, and other elements of the archive. And
so something you said made me think of the first time that I was in the Prince Street location. Nilsson helped, along with Mary Lewandowski, we sort of walked through being really struck by these really tall racks of film reels, and then just sort of being, and I know like we're in Rochester, it's a very film like heavy city that I feel like I should have known this, but I had no idea of like the wild things that happen to film and the chemicals in film when it's well loved is a good way of putting it, or just when it's old or like maybe not maintained. And so a lot of the like preservation and those things like being such a big part of it too was a really interesting thing to learn. Part of what Ernest, what we've talked about in the past is a lot of the project-based residency, bringing in artists, and you sort of like that's something that you head up. You help liaise with a lot of these artists who are coming from all over the world.
Yes.
What is a lot of that? What are those conversations like? Are a lot of folks familiar with the work and they're very excited to get here with these archives, with these specializations? Are they experiencing it for the first time?
Yeah, it runs the gamut. So not all of the artists that are a part of the residency come in with the intention of using our archives or our collections, but it is something that quite a few are aware of. And so when they apply for the residency, they often will put that straight into their proposal. Or there are maybe artists who, when they get here, maybe Tara, Jessica, or Nielsen, something will stand out about their work where we will introduce them to something in our archives that they could possibly engage with as material or as context, because it's one of the things that I have learned as an artist who my first time engaging with VSW was as an exhibiting artist. And my previous experience with VSW is mostly through reading After Image, knowing about the critical history. So I, through the years, have gotten to learn about the collections and the archives that we have here, and also about the importance of artists engaging with archives and collections as a way of contextualizing and even helping us learn about the archives. So one of our most recent residents was Melissa Ferrari, who we've spoken about, who is a magic lanternist. So as you previously mentioned, that we have these positive slides, glass slides called lantern slides. I think during her time here, she was probably, in my experience, the most knowledgeable lantern slide person I think that we've ever had in the building. And while she was here, we were introducing her to certain things and subjects that we have in our collection, but she also was teaching us about lantern slides technically and also historically, and she's someone who projects as a part of her practice, and learning from her about an actual contemporary projection that she was making while she was here was something that was a really wonderful dialogue, kind of a back and forth. Not saying that it's ideal, it's just something that the archives that we, in the collections we have, are something that enhances our artists, even if even if it isn't something that they actually use in their work. It's always something that is enriching and engaging and generative in some kind of way.
And I think that she's a great example because, yeah, her work is so projection focused, but it's also like using really old technologies in a very new way.
Yes.
It's a great case for one of the many kinds of art that can be made, not only just with VSW, like archives kind of as a part of that, but a lot of the art that VSW continues to lift up, whether that's through, film reels, videotape, like whatever the medium is, there's a lot of this stuff going. And so kind of to get to that, sort of to extend that a little bit, video games being a big part of this continuation of visual media art. And that's sort of the foundation and a lot of the work that's on display for Sequence Break. But that's just really the latest one. Nielsen, a lot of your work, your personal work, but also a lot of the work that you've brought to VSW has been experimental video game art.
Yeah, so my relationship with VSW started when I became an MFA student in 2016. And my art practice up to that point had been really heavily involved with making video games, and I was always really interested in this idea of artist games or experimental games or games that were sort of outside of the realm of, commercial games that you go to Target and buy, right? And so I'm always thinking about ways to sort of both make and champion and teach about like ways to make video games that are not sort of in those commercial realms. And so with Sequence Break, it's a group show of 5 games, and each of the artists is sort of approaching, making video games in a way that is very sort of not industry focused and very sort of different than normally how we engage with video games. We usually engage with video games at home. So for Sequence Break, you're sort of going into an art space. You're going into a gallery. It's it's public, so it's in my mind, it's sort of related to the arcade, which I think is sort of like it's something that I feel a great sort of loss. Actually, we're really lucky in Rochester. We have a couple arcades. There's a great arcade in the Strong Museum of Play, and there's also a great arcade at
It's Will.
Oh,
Swilberger.
yeah,
Swilberger
right,
has
right.
a
Yep.
fantastic arcade. But I love the idea of the arcade because it's a place where folks can sort of meet up. It's a gathering place. It's a place for events, and folks sort of share and learn from each other and can talk about what they're seeing and sort of play together. And I just think that's a lot of how we deal with video games is only online and is only it's like a solitary, and so to pull video games out into sort of a real life situation, this sort of community situation, I think is just it's really fantastic, and I'm excited to see where it goes and to sort of grow that community here in Rochester.
And I love you mentioned we're not talking about games that you'd get at Target or Electronics Boutique or whatever of my childhood. So we're talking about something like the Barnyardia pop-up arcade that was last spring at VSW.
That was fun.
Which I played a video game where it was a wheelless skateboard. It was called Scrapeboard. So that was the controller. And then there was also, and I forget the name of this one, but the one where the object of the game was to cook a chicken finger or a chicken tender.
Yeah, there was a sort of a mini game where you're manipulating the game, and as you're playing the game, if you're winning, it's attached to a microwave, and you put a single chicken nugget in the microwave, and as you're winning the game, it cooks the chicken nugget. And then if you finish the game, you get to eat a chicken nugget. That was a great event. I thought that was just fantastic.
And not to assume the going there of what are we? Is that art? What are we talking about? Because that's a whole conversation that we don't want to have. But what I like is, I guess, to flip that mentality to a more positive space. It's that's a conversation though. Inherently, you want to know not only how it works. You actually get to taste it, but you also get to ideally talk to the creators about what are the thought processes at play for this game, and kind of go from there. And so that I think goes and to that point, in terms of there was this. So one of the upcoming events, I love this. We're talking about it's sort of a demo with one of the game creators that's the opposite of a speed run. Now a speed run is where you kind of watch a game being played really quickly through on YouTube or another streaming platform, but it's usually you just watch and it goes really fast, and it's sort of, I guess I'm not a gamer, but I guess the goal or the goal of that is that you get to see all the aspects of the game kind of in a quick and kind of download that information. But this is the opposite of that. So what does that mean? What is the opposite of a speed run?
Yeah, well, so that sort of comes out of when we're showing work, and we're sort of engaging with artists. We want to hear from the artists. We like artist talks, and we want to hear about their process and what they're thinking about. Sometimes technically what they're doing. All these sort of aspects are really interesting, and there's this sort of, when you look at a painting, even if you're not a painter, you can sort of understand or imagine how it was created. With a video game, often the case is just that is something that I'll never understand. It's this magic thing that is very technical and complicated, and I'm not a coder, and I'll never understand it. And so engaging with artists and video game artists and sort of just letting them play through their games, and it's not really an artist talk, but it's a conversation with the artist, as we're sort of seeing what they've made and just hearing about how they made things, or even just what's interesting to them as they're watching the game. I think it sort of serves to demystify that process a little bit. One of the goals of Sequence Break is to, there's an educational aspect to it. I want to encourage folks that are interested in games but sort of feel overwhelmed by learning about them. this is a space to learn a bit about it.
Jessica, is that kind of everything Nilsen just described, the opportunity for that kind of engagement, was that built into a lot of the thought going into finding a new space, the kinds of events that could be hosted at the new space, that kind of stuff?
Absolutely. Definitely. I mean, the new space is 8,000 square feet. It has, you walk into a gallery, so you're immediately, in the art. And then there's a theater with raked seating for 80 people. The space was purpose-built to be a community center. It was originally the Frederick Douglass Resource Center in the Susan B. Anthony neighborhood. So it's really a perfect space for us. It really is going to enhance, I think, the experience of viewing art and viewing films. It'll certainly be a really magical experience for our residents to be in this beautiful, comfortable, welcoming space.
There's so much too about just from walking in, and I remember we had a conversation about this. And Tara, you mentioned, like, you're talking about the Prince Street location, this kind of castle-like building. It's a very different vibe, I guess, than kind of this more, not that a castle isn't welcoming, because there's like sort of sense of adventure or whatever, or like what lies be in there, whatever treasures may be in there. But that kind of welcoming, inviting atmosphere, I imagine, is like a big part. And so you walk in immediately. So, because obviously, I guess we should say a lot of renovations happened in the lead up to this, like customization. So walking into the space, gallery, and then kind of making your way through what else what else is new? What are people experiencing as they go in?
Right. Well, I'll tell you about it, but everybody can come see for themselves on March 20th when we open Sequence Break. And but yes, you walk in to a bright, open gallery space, and then there's a large hallway that takes you down to the theater. The theater has we put in a projection booth that is capable of showing many different formats of film and video. It's going to be very comfortable. It's raked seating, so the view of it's just a much better place to experience the artwork. There's also room for our archives, which we've talked about a little bit. Our access policies really create a special opportunity for artists and the public to use this material in ways that most collections don't allow such use. It's going to be a really wonderful space. We're very excited to invite the community in.
And so a couple times now we talked about the collection, we talked about the archive. Can we maybe talk a little bit about, and maybe expand on, Tara, what you were saying before about what you might find in the collection? So we've talked a lot about the objects. We're talking about slides, lantern slides, different film reels, videotape. What is often on those mediums? What are the films? Are they educational films? Are they feature films, documentaries?
Well, the 16mm collection is largely educational films that came from the sources I mentioned. So they were used in classrooms, they were used in libraries. Sometimes we have what's called a reduction print of a feature, which would have been reducing from 35mm to 16mm. So we do have feature films, Casablanca and King Kong and those kinds of classics, as well as really a handful of rare films, avant-garde films, short films, some films that were locally produced or made here in Rochester by perhaps VSW students over the past 56 years. One in particular I'll mention is a film called About Us, which was made at Visual Studies Workshop with Robert Frank, the artist and filmmaker and photographer, who was actually a visiting he did a workshop. I mean, he was a friend of Nathan and Jones and came in 1971 to do a workshop with our students. And the workshop resulted in a 38-minute black and white film that is really made by VSW students in the style of Robert Frank. I mean, with his collaboration, and he's present in the films, and it's really a masterpiece. And that's the only film that VSW ever produced ourselves. And we had it preserved also in 2018, and so that print is available, but we do also love to show it. So, those kinds of unique titles. We also have a handful of home movies, and we love home movies. And if anyone wants to donate home movies, we're definitely a place that would be interested in that region, especially if you're from the region. What's really unique in our collection, in our moving image collection, is the videos. The video collection, we have over 6,000 titles, and 13 formats now. So multiple formats going all the way back to the old WXXI knows this because they came from here, the 2-inch master videotapes from the studio. But the collections are very special to us, specifically the Portable Channel collection. Portable Channel was a group of media activists here in Rochester, active from 1971 through about 1986. We have 1,200 tapes from this collection. And what is found in these tapes are unique materials made by people who were motivated to make their own media at a time when they had the means to do so for the first time. So when Portapax, those old half-inch open-reel video recorders, became available, the ethos there was to make your own media and to promote it, among yourselves, but also to try to show what wasn't being represented on television and popular media. And they were successful in doing so. And in fact, it's kind of the founder of Portable Channel, Bonnie Klein, was able to work with WXXI and have a program here on, I think it was called Channel 12.
22.
Channel 22,
it
yeah,
was
21,
22.
Channel 21.
Oh, 21.
21, okay.
It's the
Anyhow,
Roman numeral.
it was an opportunity for regional and local programming, and at the time, again, half-inch video was really hard to show on in studio. So Bonnie convinced WXXI to zoom in on the screen. They would bring in their own players and a little monitor, and they got the friendly and generous producers here to give it a shot, and they zoomed in on the screen. And this is 1972, the very first documented instance of half-inch open-reel community-produced media being shown on public television. Huge, and that was called Homemade TV. We have over 50 episodes of that preserved. We do in-house media preservation, so we're able to digitize these, and they're all available on our website, vsw.org. And that's just one of our exciting collections. We also have other regional activist collections, specifically TV Dinner. They worked with Metro Justice. We have 1,200 tapes from that collection, and so much from the artist realm as well. So lots of video art from New York State.
This brings up something that I actually have been thinking about. This is a slightly more academic question, but the are there a lot of parallels between when videotape was becoming accessible because of camcorders and these early sort of precursors to what became like the little digital camcorders? Was there a likewise I guess an optimism, sort of a democratic optimism with the advent of the camera phone?
Oh, the camera,
like a cell phone camera.
Well, I mean,
because this idea that everyone can have one and that kind of thing.
Well, certainly, I mean, like citizen documentary journalism really blossomed when the Portapak, when you could just really easily, I mean, it wasn't super easy with the Portapak, but it was easier to capture, the world, just like the phone made it easier. So I think definitely there are parallels between the advance of that technology, as technology advances, certainly that is definitely the case. I'd like to just mention just briefly some of our other collections, because we have, a research library with 7,000 books. We have a 6,000 artist books that come from our activities with Visual Studies Workshop Press and Joan Lyons. That is a really important collection. We also have photography, over 1 million photographs, photographic images in various formats. We have also an incredible collection from our 56 years of students. So we have the Trace collection, which represents most, not all, but most of the students that came through Visual Studies Workshop. And we have so much more. So it's really, a really significant collection and very unusual for an organization of our size to have that sort of material. And it was something that Nathan was very passionate about after he left the Eastman House, was to develop these materials to serve the activities of the workshop.
We're speaking with some members of the team Visual Studies Workshop here on Connections. We have to take a quick break. When we get back, we will talk more a little bit about future, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about sequence break and kind of video game art. So we'll take a break and we'll be right back.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Mary Cariola Center, providing education and life skills solutions designed to empower individuals and the families of those with complex disabilities. Mary Cariola Center, transforming lives of people with disabilities. More at marycariola.org.
We're back here on Connections, talking with folks from Visual Studies Workshop. We have Nilson Carroll, Ernest Davis, Jessica Johnston, and Tara Miranda Nelson. Thank you all for being here. We were just talking a lot about what is found at VSW in the collections, in the archives, more than we could say here. We could spend the next 20 minutes talking about what's there. A great way is to check out the online archives or go visit. So I guess that's something we probably should have said up front. So March 20th, big day, right? If you want to see this in person, that's the day to do it. That's the sort of official opening of VSW's new location at 36 King Street in the Susan B. Anthony neighborhood. It's March 20th is the opening of the Sequence Break exhibit. Although there is an event tomorrow, right? That is sort of the unofficial kickoff. It's an online event before that.
Yeah, we are doing our first sort of Sequence Break event tomorrow at 1. It's going to be streaming online at Twitch, which you can find the information about at vsw.org. I'll be sort of doing an interview panel discussion with the artist Heart Street, which is 4 artists from New York that have made a game called Out for Delivery, which will be featured in Sequence Break.
And this game's pretty fascinating. Just reading a little bit about it, it sort of ties into the origins of the COVID pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it follows a delivery person in Beijing the day before the outbreak, before the pandemic started. And so people are starting to, as the delivery person's going throughout their day, you sort of hear murmurs of oh, I think there's something's happening. We keep hearing the word pandemic. And one of the artists in Heart Street is following and documenting that delivery person's day. And so the game is actually a sort of interactive 360 video following the delivery person. So players are able to sort of look all around and sort of follow the person on their little bike and through they go, through buildings, and they pick up food. And it's such a... I've played a lot of video games, and I've never played a video game like that. So it really excites me personally to see something like that.
So speaking of video games, we have an email from a fellow Patrick who says, the only time I've ever seen this game, which is a Michael Jackson-based version of the Simpsons arcade game or maybe the Ninja Turtles arcade game with all Michael Jacksons. I believe 2 or 4 players. The music was epic. The special moves were moonwalk, spinning, throw the hat. I wish Swilberg would pick this up so I could have beers and play it. The only time I ever saw it was in a hockey arena in the early 90s. Are you familiar with this game?
I actually do know that game.
Do you remember what is it called? Do you remember?
Not off the top of my head.
But it jogs.
Yeah,
the gameplay jogs.
I can picture it for sure. Yes.
Very cool. Maybe we'll see it at Swilberger. Maybe we'll see a version of it at VSW. We'll see what happens.
But it has a good soundtrack.
It would have to.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
There was also a thing where I think Michael Jackson, didn't he also surreptitiously do the music for one of the Sonic games or something? He may have contributed the music for this.
Yes, that's I think that's true. It might be an urban legend. But
That's true.
I think it might be true.
Yeah. It's true that it is talked about, but whether or not it is true, that if it is true, is the jury is still out on that one. Yes, I like the description of Sequence Break as a an exhibition. I'm just going to read it. Sequence Break is a dynamic multimedia exhibition featuring works by artists who challenge mainstream commercial video game culture through genre-expanding experimental play, radical aesthetics, and the use of DIY counter-capitalist methodologies. The exhibition offers an in-person opportunity that is unique to the contemporary experience of playing digital games while opening a broader dialogue with a virtual audience through streaming artist talks, workshops, and gallery tours. So we talked a lot about that element, the community element, sort of getting to know it. The methodology is really interesting too. So we're talking about these DIY, these sort of more fringe methodologies, and you were saying before, like not. I guess, are they immediately able to be pegged as such just by looking at the graphics or the gameplay? I mean, visually speaking, kind of aesthetically, are these kind of easy to peg as like, this seems like it might be like a DIY thing?
I think it varies from game to game, but I would say that all 5 of the games in the show do not look like mainstream games.
Okay.
I think each one of them is sort of operating in a different way and sort of approaching game making as an artist differently. For instance, what's a good example? Heart Street, I think, is really sticks in my mind is like, I've never played a game that is 360 video that I can sort of look around and move around in on the back of a motorcycle, following a delivery person, even without the sort of the backdrop of the COVID pandemic looming, like that's just really fascinating. It's a fascinating document. Mm-hmm. And there's something really humane about it. We're sort of moving away from like, we think about video games, we think about shooting and violence and winning and sort of, getting money and just like sort of amassing points. And each game in Sequence Break, doesn't really have anything like that. It's sort of a different way to engage with these sort of digital artworks. And I would say, too, that, there's a long tradition of artists working with video games. I think the conversation often will be like, this is a new thing. Like, I've never thought of this before. But, looking back in sort of experimental art that is sort of tech focused. There were artists making video games in the 80s and definitely in the 90s and then through the 2000s. And so the 5 games in Sequence Break are from the past couple of years. A lot of them are from the 2024. But there's a long history of artist games. And so I think it's important to sort of understand that context and VSW has a history of artists making video games. So there was a really fascinating show in 1993 at VSW, an exhibition curated by Brian Goldfarb that was all about interactive medical software and video games that taught folks about AIDS and like AIDS prevention. And so the artists and medical professionals and coders would work together to create these arcade cabinets that would go into gay bars, and folks would be able to play through these sort of scenarios and make decisions and see and learn about AIDS prevention. And so I always think about that as like super forward thinking, both for them to make those games, but then for, Brian Goldfarb at VSW to show that work in an art space as an art exhibition is just like, super forward thinking.
Yeah, very much so. And just to, I guess, close the loop, the Michael Jackson game was apparently called Moonwalker.
Perfect.
So now we know. And I love hearing about how experimental video games and different ways of thinking about video games have been so ingrained in video art, or I guess visual art or media art, since long before they sort of became this like dominant sort of cultural force that they are, the multimedia or multi-million-dollar industry, sort of as it is now in the mainstream. There's also, and again, like we've been talking, that's just one sort of aspect of what we're talking about here. Another one I love, Ernest. We talked a little bit about last summer when new crop of project space resident artists were being announced and talking about their work. We talked a little bit about this idea of open studios and of you sort of being able to come in. Again, we go back to accessibility. People from the public coming in, watching an artist at work. There's one coming up, right? It's April 10th.
Yes.
So, and that is Sydney.
And that's with Sydney Miko King, who's our upcoming resident will actually be our first resident in the new space.
Okay. Yeah, very cool. So what does that look like, as far as you can tell?
Yes. So an open studio, and this is great because, again, even, the gamut of the artists that we accept into the residency are, emerging, mid-career, established. And I just had this conversation with one of our artists about what is an open studio, what is it for? And so open studios are essentially a way for artists to open up their studio space, quite literally, open up the door, because the studio, especially in our residency, is one where we leave them alone as much as we can. We also welcome them to engage with us, but we really want it to be an open space where they can come here and make work, use our resources, and engage how they would like to engage with their work, with their practice. And so open studios allows the public to come in and to talk with the artist, walk around, look at what they've been making, ask questions, get to know them. It's up to the artist, really, how they kind of shape their open studios. Some artists like to be very casual, and others like to make installations or some combination of the two. But it really is an opportunity to, again, as Nilsen was saying, talk to the artist, learn about their practice. It also is a way of demystifying what an artist is, or what an artist looks like, how an artist works, because for every residency that we have, we do give them an opportunity to open up their studio. And so we invite people to come each time to see how different they are and how different artists work, how different the space, how they transform the space, and how different they choose to represent themselves during open studios. And so, yeah, it is one of those wonderful community engagement things that we like to give opportunities for our artists to open themselves up to the public, and also to let the public actually meet with our artists personally.
And then sort of paired with that, the same night, right, there's a screening of films by the video artist Peggy Awesh, and then there's a conversation between you and Peggy Tara.
That's right. And it also coincides with our most recent film art book publication through Visual Studies Workshop Press, which is Peggy Awesh's source books. We publish artist books, and this is our most recent publication. Peggy, is an artist, filmmaker, video artist, and also graphic artist. Who is formerly a resident as well. And when she came for a residency, we got to know her work a little bit deeper on the side of research. The source books are basically publications of facsimiles of her research over almost 5 decades of filmmaking for 5 of her most well-known films, some of which you'll be able to see that night, including She Puppet, which is a 2000 film featuring the video game Tomb Raider. It's a feminist take on the life or the travails of Lara Croft. It's a really influential piece. The source books actually looks at the research behind her work, which is a really important part of Peggy's practice and any artist's practice, really. And I think that goes to this demystification. Is we think artists, maybe go into a well-lit garret above, in some Parisian, with a baguette and a bottle of wine, and really they're working very hard and deeply and in so many different ways. And this book really, I think, reveals one artist's particular type of research. She's very deeply concerned with theory and visual, and sort of how theory plays out in sort of visual media. And she kind of applies those two in her work. So please do come April 10th. It's going to be an amazing opportunity to both experience a resident in their own studio, and then see our most recent publication and an amazing program of films by Peggy Awish, and she will be there in person.
And so go
And
ahead.
if I could add one
please.
thing about Sydney. So Sydney also is an example of the kinds of artists that we tend to support. So she is a photographer, but is very expansive in how she uses photography, and then will be is someone who deconstructs cameras, works with cameras obscura, and also works in the darkroom. And so she's someone who the work that she's making really deals with traces of the body. And so she's someone who's been crafting very specific kinds of lenses. And this is something that I'm really interested in seeing because her past work also deals with, leaving out film in unexposed film in a room for a really long time. And then, or even the way she installs things, it's really sculptural. So I just would encourage people to come through and see how she installs the space and also the types of images that she's able to make during her time in residency.
Yeah,
So-
and that's also the way that artists make the space their own and the way that they choose to present the work. And that actually, I was going to ask. I mean, we have working artists in this room too, so obviously you can all refute this myth of an artist with a baguette and
Oh yeah.
I don't know if
the
the bag-
cappuccino, and there's a lot of work that goes into what you're seeing as someone who's viewing the art is a highly distilled end result of a lot of that practice, essentially.
Yeah. And an open studio is a great opportunity to kind of get a little bit of background into that, especially if you're interested in our practice, or you're interested in just what's on the wall or what's in the middle of the floor, or how they even got here, and in their experience in Rochester. So.
And Visual Studies Workshop, I'll say, is a great place for you yourself, whether you identify as an artist or not, to kind of have, follow your own kind of process, or creative process. Everyone has one. And that's what our collections are for. That's what the workshop is founded on, is sort of creative inquiry, and why we have these collections. We have these collections for the public to engage with and to think critically about. And we really are so excited about our new space at 36 King Street being a place where the public can come do research, explore what the collections might, speak to them. And it really does depend on, everyone has, will discover something new for themselves.
Are there particular challenges or opportunities of being a working artist today, especially in your chosen mediums? I mean, is there? I don't know.
Oh, it's
that could
real
be a
easy,
whole other
Patrick.
show, right? But and I'm
No
like,
challenges,
we
no,
have
sir.
we have 6 minutes
That's
left.
why they all have second jobs.
So that's a big one, financial, of course, economic. But I mean, are there? But I guess like maybe technologically speaking, there are opportunities to always be, I guess, pursuing new ways of exploring art, and especially when it comes to media art and visual art, as the tech kind of expands. If you choose to go in that direction with emerging technology.
Yeah. Which artist
That's
wants to jump
open-ended,
on
yeah.
this one?
I will say that there's a pretty robust online community of artists that are willing to sort of discuss and share and show how things are done. Definitely all the artists in Sequence Break engage within these sort of DIY games communities. Tool building is really important. And sometimes artists, they make tools and they don't necessarily make art that is like, how we think about like an art project. They build tools for communities to use and show how they're made. And I think all of the artists in Sequence Break sort of, rely on that kind of, the sort of DIY ethic of showing how it's done and sharing, knowledge. So.
And that might be a good. So I wanted to make sure we sort of left space here at the end to talk about 2029 is 4 years from now. It will be the 60th, I guess 60th year, 60th anniversary of ESW.
Whoa.
We're talking about a new space. Sort of with that comes sort of natural, opportunities of framing it as a new chapter. That kind of stuff is sort of what we've been doing. Are you thinking about that already in terms of the anniversary, or just is it more like I'm just really excited to open the new space at the moment?
I have not, I don't know if anybody else has, but I have not been thinking as far ahead as 2029.
Very hard to do at the
couldn't
moment.
even say
yeah.
it. Maybe in a couple months we'll start thinking about that. We are thinking ahead to next year, where we're planning next summer. We are thinking about doing a alumni celebration and exhibition to sort of honor all the people, the many artists that have come through Visual Studies Workshop, many of which are still in the community here in Rochester. And so that's something that we're planning for next summer. We also do have another exhibition after Sequence Break that's going to be in the fall that Ernez is curating with 3 artists.
Yes.
So do you want to say something about
Please.
that?
I'll just because there will be more about it, but it's, the title, it is featuring 3 artists who are working or engaging with diasporic conversations in their work. It's a mixture of photographic and filmic artists, featuring Claudia Claudemi, who is based in Madrid but has roots in Cuba and Puerto Rico, and also was a project-based resident. Samantha Box, who was born in Jamaica but has been living in the U.S. and also was a project-based resident. And then Alida Rodriguez, who was born in Angola and is based in London. But all 3 of these artists are photographers and filmmakers who are having diasporic conversations, Spanish-speaking diasporic conversations and African diasporic conversations. And they're all sort of engaging with movement, migration, tradition, and how does one maintain a connection to where they are from when they are not able to be there. And so, yes, it's just a really wonderful group of artists, and that will open in late September.
Okay.
And yeah, that's upcoming.
Yeah, that sounds great. So opening in late September. Before that, as we've been talking about, March 20th is the day at VSW's new location, 36 King Street. Sequence Break is the new exhibition. I want to thank my guests from Visual Studies Workshop, and I'm going to refer to my notes here to make sure I get their titles all correct. Tara Miranda Nelson, curator at VSW, managing editor of VSW Press. Jessica Johnston, the executive director of VSW. Ernez Davis, assistant curator and residency coordinator at VSW. And Nilson Carroll, assistant curator and preservation specialist at VSW and the curator of Sequence Break, which again, March 20th is the day. So thank you all for joining.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate
Thank
you having
you.
this conversation.
Thank you, Patrick.
Patrick Hoskin here, sitting in for Evan Dawson. Thank you for listening to member-supported public radio.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.